Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to turn things over to Allison McCann.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our last Business Series conversation of the year. I'm Allison McCann, the Group Vice President of Business Development for the Portland Press Herald. Today, Business Projects Editor Carol Coltis will be moderating a panel discussion on social media, a topic on everyone's minds these days. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and thank our subscribers for their support. And while we're at it, I will just do a plug that if you are having a hard time finding the perfect gift for that hard to shop person on your list, a subscription to Portland Press Herald fits everyone. And now I would like to extend my gratitude to our sponsors for their support for this programming all year long. Thank you to Cross Insurance, Catad and Trust Company, Goodwill Northern New England, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and our presenting sponsor, Machias Savings Bank. And with that, I will turn things over to Carol and her panelists, and I hope you all enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Allie. Welcome, everyone. I am just going to make sure I'm unmuted. Here I am. Okay, good. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. I know that there's been a lot of attention, a lot of news around social media these days, with Twitter taking the bulk of those headlines. But a lot of other changes have happened recently in other social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and they have kind of upended what had been conventional e-marketing strategies and have left a lot of people wondering, is this even worth my time anymore? So we thought that it would be a good time to consider that question, particularly since so many small and medium-sized businesses in Maine really amped up their online presence to get through the pandemic. And now is perhaps a good time to step back and look at their social media strategy. Does it need to be refined? Maybe it isn't really even a strategy yet, and so they have to develop it. So that's what prompted this conversation. And then I found some interesting data that I think underscores the importance of this issue. According to eMarketer, which researches and gathers intelligence around social media, in 2020, there were about $27 billion of retail social commerce that was logged in that year. That number is expected to more than double next year to 57 billion. And by 2025, just a couple of years from now, that should be reaching 80 billion. So if you're in business and you're selling a service or a product and you don't have a social media strategy, you're really going to be left in the dust. And so that's how we ended up here today with this topic. And I'm really delighted to say we have a fabulous panel to help us explore all of that. So before I introduce them, here's just a word about our format. We're going to chat, the panelists and I will chat for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. Many of you submitted questions when you registered for this event, and so we will have those queued up when we get to the Q&A portion of this afternoon. But if a question occurs to you, please use the Q&A button on our Zoom navigation bar, and our fabulous Zoom guru, Strawberry Mojini, will queue up your questions and we'll get to those as well. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists, and we can begin our conversation. First, we have Dan Reed. Dan is a serial entrepreneur and a marketing consultant with a background in video marketing, social media strategy, and co-marketing. Last fall, he joined SCORE to manage and improve SCORE Maine's approach to marketing and technology. And I'm sure if you're a small or medium-sized business, you already know about SCORE. It's a fabulous organization with a lot of resources for smaller entrepreneurs. Dan is also a board member of the Portland Media Center. And joining us is Izzy Seidman. She joined Flight New Media after moving to Portland in 2020. She's somebody who came to our fair city during the pandemic, and she finds it very similar to Burlington, Vermont, where she grew up, with the added benefit of ocean air and fresh seafood. She has a degree in English and a background in the nonprofit sector, which is one of the reasons I invited her to join us today, because she understands a working environment that's lean. And so when you're talking about money resources and you're talking about time and energy resources, understanding that from a nonprofit sector, I think helps you assess whether something is worth investing your time and money. She has a curiosity for all things related to communication, from social media and email newsletters to website management and SEO. And finally, we have Nathan O'Leary joining us. He is the founder of Mainly SEO, a full-service digital marketing agency specializing in the hospitality and tourism industries, as well as product launches for e-commerce businesses. He has over 20 years of experience as a digital marketer. He also is a certified mentor of Portland, Maine SCORE, so another plug there, where he holds regular educational workshops, presentations, and one-on-one coaching. As a serial entrepreneur, Nate also owns and manages two other Portland and Maine-focused businesses, PortlandOldPort.com and Crateful of Maine. PortlandOldPort.com combines a website and social media presence dedicated to keeping residents and tourists up to speed on local news and events. And Crateful of Maine features bespoke gift boxes packed full of locally made products from beloved Maine companies. And that's what you see behind Nate, that tower of boxes, because this is a really busy time of year for him. So I'm very grateful that all three of you have been able to find the time to join me today and to have this conversation. So let's get underway here. I think it's easy for the manager of a small or medium-sized business to feel overwhelmed when they think about adopting a social media strategy. So what are the first three things that you advise a client to do when launching or refining a social media strategy? And Dan, how about, since that's a lot of what you do at SCORE, so how about if you get us going by answering that question first?
The best place to start, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing. I would say the best place to start is probably really getting a good understanding of your ideal customer, really narrowing down where your customer spends time and what they're thinking about when they spend that time. When people are on LinkedIn, they're going to make different decisions, not only in your content consumption, but different decisions in your buying decisions than when you're on Instagram. Probably because you're on Instagram on your personal time, and you might be on LinkedIn when you have more of that kind of like business mentality. So you want to make sure that you really understand that same perspective, but from your customer's seat of view, where they're spending time, and really get a better understanding of how they make buying decisions, and then incorporate those understandings and buying decisions into your marketing platform.
So how do you do that, though? How do you find out how a customer is making a buying decision? By monitoring a social media platform?
So that one, finding out if they're making the buying decision at the social media platform itself is very difficult. And that really comes down to having a lot of touch points in your marketing. There are certain ways to track that, but I'm not sure if that's something that's practical for the average small business owner.
Okay.
I think it looks a lot more like if you want more information on really understanding your ideal customer, asking customers that you trust or friends that would be ideal customers for you is a great way, and filling out a business model canvas, or rather an ideal customer canvas. And there are other ways as well, such as getting in touch with the Portland Public Library. They have access to the Gale Business Data Demographics Now research database that has its own ideal customer profiles and demographic data and psychographic information. And those are just kind of like fancy terms for like how you can really understand your client. And that kind of gives you a place to start with already existing data if you're kind of uncomfortable trying to build that from scratch.
Cool. And the Portland Library, that database is free to people who hold a library card, right?
Yeah, you can actually access it from your house just by putting in your library card number.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Izzy, what's your advice? What are the three things that you want to make sure you get really good information about when you have a new client?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad Dan mentioned customer research, because I think that that's a really important one. And sort of, like you said, building those profiles to understand where are they online, how are they interacting. I would echo that. But another couple things that I think often get skipped, especially with social media marketing, is assessing what your goals are. So a lot of times I'll find small and medium-sized businesses that just want to like dive straight into, I'm going to post a bunch and I'm going to do this or that. I'm going to start running ads. And they do all those things before they take a step back and say, what are the results that I'm looking to get from social media? Because they can often be different goals than some of your other marketing strategies. So for example, social media might be more about audience building and engagement and building that trust rather than necessarily making conversions and getting sales. So taking the time to evaluate what you're looking to get out of social media before you start planning how much effort and time you're going to actually put into implementing it. And then one other thing that I would mention is just also planning for how you are going to measure your success on those platforms. So making sure you have strategies for understanding your data and benchmarking, you know, how you are achieving those goals that you just set. Because there's always going to be a moment where you have to step back and reevaluate again and then adjust and optimize. And if you don't have a way to measure those things, then you're going to find yourself having no answer to a lot of your questions.
So can you just sort of sketch out an example of, you know, here's, you can do a hypothetical or from your own experience, but here's the result you're hoping for, and here's how you measure it. Like, can you give us an example of a small or medium-sized business's experience with that?
Absolutely, yeah. So if I'm a business who's looking for more people to, you know, find my profile on social media and then visit my website, because that really is the next step in the customer journey. I might do some research first into some industry standards for what a click-through rate on an organic post or on an ad might be. And that way, as I'm heading into those strategies, I can understand where do I fall against that average. And then as you're going, you know, collecting your own personal data and making sure that you're coming up with your company's, your business's averages as well, because they can sometimes vary greatly from other businesses in your industry. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so once you have the data, you can figure out whether what you're doing is successful or you need to fine tune it in another way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. And Nate, I sort of see you as the dean of social media strategy here because you've been doing this for such a long time. So what are the three things that you always make sure you cover with a new client in terms of trying to either launch or refine a social media strategy?
Yeah, excuse me. So just obviously what they've already laid out is very important. You know, defining who your audience is and where they spend their time, as well as how to measure those results. I always like to see what my competitors are doing as well.
Okay.
So, you know, checking out their profiles, how often are they posting, what kind of content are they posting, so that you can get a sense of, you know, how are you going to compete with them for that same sort of attention. The measuring piece is really important. It's not necessarily always about the likes or the number of followers you have. It's just really about the engagement. People oftentimes just lurk on social media and they don't actually do anything. So they might be clicking through, so you can get those measurements of them clicking through and visiting your website. And they might not actually be commenting or liking on some of your posts. So, and finding out, again, what that action is, which could be very different from your traditional business goals. It could be just getting email signups, which then could in turn lead to sending out a monthly newsletter or something.
Okay. I mean, so I assume you've done this. And so I'm curious, have you ever been surprised by something you've been monitoring on a competitor's website?
Yeah, I mean, you can get lots of great ideas. You can see, again, what they're doing, and then you can also potentially see what not to do if what your competitors are doing doesn't necessarily align with your goals. They might have it wrong. And so I'd also just say, which kind of goes against this whole workshop, but social media might not be for every single business. You
Okay.
might be like a plumbing company, and social media isn't really going to be a big driver necessarily of business. But then again, having a presence on there might get people to comment or tag your business when somebody asks like for a referral to a plumber. And if you didn't have that presence on social media for them to potentially even tag you or mention you to a friend, so it's important to have a presence on there. It just depends how active really you need to be, again, to align with your business goals.
So just following that for just a moment, do you see a big generational divide in terms of people who will go online and look for those kinds of referrals as opposed to, talking to a neighbor, or if you're looking for a plumber, if there's a service that you're specifically interested in? Are younger people usually looking it up on their phones and older people maybe not so much?
Yeah, there definitely is. And that would sometimes land you on a different social media platform altogether. So, Facebook tends to skew much older. It was, very popular when there was a lot of kids in college that were signing up on Facebook, and then their parents signed up on Facebook so they could see what their kids were doing. But obviously now, they might have gravitated towards Instagram, and then there's TikTok, which is a whole nother world. And so, yeah, it's just important to, see what works for you. There's a lot of information out there. Going back to research, you can see what the sort of demographics are for each different social network to see which ones might be aligned with the persona that you're trying to target. So that's definitely important as well.
Okay. Well, then, so sort of expounding on that, managers nowadays wear a lot of hats. And so I'm curious, how do you talk about time and energy needed for successful social media execution? And Nate, maybe you could just pick that up since you're sort of on a roll around that anyway. So, how do you get a handle on that? How much time and energy you need to invest in social media?
Yeah. Again, I guess it matters what your goals are, of course. And then once you're measuring those results, seeing if it is working and potentially making some changes. But I'd say, you've got to dedicate maybe a little bit of time every single day, especially starting out, whether that's like a half an hour or an hour potentially, to monitor your presence online, see what people are saying about you, see who's engaged with your stuff over time, and then potentially responding to any questions that come in. But as you kind of come up with a process and get in the groove of things, you can really hopefully streamline your process so you're not taking as much time as you once did to monitor these platforms and stuff. It's really important too to schedule your posts out over a period of time. So if you are a business that is looking to dive in head first and wants to be engaging and posting every single day, there's tools out there. Some are even built into these platforms that allow you to schedule your posts ahead of time so that you can dedicate maybe time at one time of the week for, the next potential 7 days worth of content. And then you should have your alerts set up so that if somebody does leave a comment or comments or shares a post or something, you can see that. Not everything requires like immediate attention. Obviously, if a customer has a question, you want to get back to them rather quickly so that they don't just move on to somebody else. But yeah, that process, depending on how influential and impactful social media is for your business, might dictate how much time you need to invest in that. I'll just say if you're, again, in the hospitality space, which we work with a lot, hotels or restaurants and things of that nature, it's just super important that you have somebody that can look at this and get those sort of alerts. People nowadays, if they're having a poor experience, in the moment might even be leaving a negative review on Yelp or Google My Business or potentially Facebook. And if you're potentially the general manager running that establishment and you can see that, or you can even see somebody commenting, then maybe you can turn that negative experience into something positive because you're able to deal with it, hopefully in real time. I know that seems like an impossible task, but that's somehow how you can really turn something negative around into a positive and handle the issue at hand, if at all possible. I know it's a lot to ask for, again, all the things that everybody's trying to manage and do all at the same time, but.
Okay. I think you've got some very good specific advice in there. So thank you for that. Dan, what do you think? How do you approach how to assess the time and the energy that's needed for a successful social media campaign?
I think one of the best ways is actually trying to wear multiple hats at the same time. And what I mean by that is when you're doing something like investing time into your social media strategy, that strategy should be helping you off of social media. And I don't mean direct, like with direct sales, that's everyone's first thought. But a good example, I was working with a craft brewery last year, and they wanted to sell more kegs because aluminum was getting more expensive. So I came up with the idea of doing with my background in video, a video series with their different restaurants that had their beers on tap and featuring a paired item from the menu with the beer that's on tap so that he could build better relationships with his distributors. And
Wow.
The reasoning behind that is, so when you are doing social media, you're really only kind of putting together content or posting content. You're not spending that time turning your brain trying to come up with some kind of strategy development, coming up with a new post idea. Your post ideas should come from your other forms of business development or in other aspects of your business.
Okay.
To Nate's experience, not everyone needs to be on Facebook, but because no one's looking on Facebook for a plumber, but I guarantee you that if you're a plumber and you post for open work on Facebook, you're gonna have a much better experience than posting for to hire someone than to have someone hire you. So it's much easier to look for work in a blue collar job, for example, than it is to advertise your blue collar business on Facebook. Just things like that, where you're really using social media in conjunction with other aspects of your business that are already turning, so you can kind of hit two birds with one stone.
So it's kind of a holistic approach. It's not segmented, it's integrated into your whole business strategy.
Yeah, well, until you hire a firm or someone who's dedicated to taking over your social media full time, it's almost guaranteed to be the business owner or an office manager. So you want to make sure that the work they're doing on social media feeds into the other work that they're doing in a natural way.
Okay, good. Thank you. Also good advice. How about you, Izzy?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a controversial opinion about this, and I think
Okay.
it does come somewhat from my work with nonprofits, but also just many small businesses that, Flight has contracted with. I think a lot of our clients come in with the idea that, when it comes to social media, the more the merrier. And that's reflected in a lot of the research online. If you were to Google the question, how many times should I post on Pinterest? They'll tell you to do it 5 to 15 times a day. And to a small to medium-sized business owner, that's like scary, and I would push back and say that it's really not about the quantity, it's about the quality of the content. Okay. So if you are just posting for the sake of meeting those best practices and meeting those standards that you'll find in blogs and online, the likelihood that content is actually helpful to your audience or connecting with them in a meaningful way is pretty low. So if you only have the time to make one post a week, it's okay. Just make sure that you're spending, the thought process to find a way to actually provide value to your customers. And I think you'll find that the payout for that can be much bigger than trying to post every day of the week and trying to be constantly present on, 5 different platforms.
Interesting. So it's all about the quality, not the quantity.
Yeah. And I mean, as you grow, obviously increasing the amount that you're in those spaces can have a lot of benefits. But I think for people who are just starting out, just always keeping in mind the value to your customer when you're going through these strategies. And I think that connects to what Dan was saying about taking a holistic approach and trying to understand, how does this actually impact my other marketing efforts? Not just being there for the sake of proof of concept.
So I'm curious, I think that many times you don't know what you don't know. And so if you're in a business and you're trying to launch a social media strategy and you aren't totally aware of the best way to do this, there are those, unintended consequences. And so I'm just curious, can you share a story about a client who was either unaware of social media's impact or wasn't using it properly, and what happened once they learned and adopted best practices? I think this is always a learning curve for everyone. And so I think that those kinds of experiences are helpful. So Izzy, why don't you share an example with us?
Sure, yeah. So the first one that comes to mind for me is we have a client who makes products in the baseball industry. And when we first sort of contracted with them to take over organic social, not advertising, but specifically their organic strategy, we noticed that like 99% of the content that they were posting was sales focused. It was really focused on the products that they had to offer and pushing people to buy, which is an important aspect of social media, but it lacked that meaning and value for their customers, and the repetition resulted in sort of decreasing gains over time. So we took a step back to say, how can you as a brand become a thought leader and a resource for your customer rather than just a place where you can buy a product. So that turned into, instead of just posting about the products themselves, posting about training tips for baseball players and resources that they could find outside of the brand, like links to interesting articles, news from within the industry, and mixing that together with the products themselves so that they were providing more value to their customers. And we saw over the last, I believe we've been with them for 10 or 11 months now, just a huge increase in engagement. And a lot of that engagement comes from the non-sales focused posts. And I don't know, I'm sure Dan and Nate are familiar with this, but it's a little like a vicious cycle whenever it comes to the social media algorithms. If you do well on one thing, the next thing that you post will get more reach. It will likely get more engagement. So even if your most popular content is not your product-based content, it's going to reflect then in how many people are seeing, clicking on, engaging with those things.
And ultimately, that should result in increased sales, or at least increased reach for marketing and hopefully sales. Okay.
Yeah, and building brand trust too. You are not always saying buy. I think anyone can sort of look at it from the human perspective and think that's annoying. So yeah, just having common sense helps a lot.
Yeah, great. How about you, Dan? Do you have an experience or an example you can share?
I would say actually with the same client, the craft brewery client.
Yeah.
I felt like he had a really good job where in the tap room, there was a great tap room experience. And that tap room experience just didn't really translate over to the social media experience, almost exclusively because he was very nervous about, like, we talk a lot about finding your voice as a marketing person on social media. And that's a real challenge for most small business owners. And it especially when you're transitioning from posting on your own personal social media to now you're representing a brand. And a lot of people feel like they need to find some voice of the brand out there that's neutral to everyone that they can appeal to. And I think the authenticity of posting as yourself, who happens to be a person who works at that brand or started that brand, comes through a lot more than trying to put on a presentation of who you think people want to hear from. And it's a lot more human, and people really connect with that human angle. So that's not necessarily like a particular piece of strategy so much as you don't have to sweat it so much when you're thinking about posting. It's really, and when you post 4 or 5 times a week, if you're nervous 4 or 5 times a week, every time you post, it's going to turn it into a bad thing.
That's great advice too. How about you, Nate? Do you have an example you can share with sort of a company or a client that wasn't quite doing it correctly and then made some changes and ended up with a good result?
Yeah, I can remember something, it was several years ago, but there was locally basically a business that didn't feel like they needed social media. And so by not creating any profiles or having a page that they managed or I guess owned, a lot of times Facebook will just throw together content that they can scrape from the internet. Mm-hmm. And it oftentimes has like the wrong information. And then people just kind of, I wouldn't say it's like a Wikipedia page, but people online can suggest edits and changes to different businesses. And if you don't have an official presence online, then it can be a lot more detrimental to your business if you're not taking it seriously. If you are so well established, you feel like I don't even need it, then that can do a lot of harm because a lot of wrong information can be out there. Your hours could be incorrect, and things like that. And then it's just kind of like you're having to clean up a big mess because somebody thought that you were open and they showed up and you were closed, and now that person like leaves you a negative review, which could just lead to so many other things. And just back to Izzy's point about like kind of less is more. There are definitely ways to like help amplify your message on social media by paying for a boost, if you will. There's obviously more advanced ways to run targeted ads, but if you've created like one really good post a week, maybe you could I'd recommend throwing a little bit of money behind it so you can reach more people that are fitting your demographic, so that you've taken that one really good piece and just spread it out so that even more people see it, not just the people that are following your page.
Mm-hmm. Good. All of that I think is very helpful. And so Facebook seems to be the oldest and most widely used social media platform, but recent changes in its targeting capabilities have frustrated businesses who have been using it for advertising. So I'm just curious, do you have any advice for getting better results, or is it better to invest your time and money in a different platform altogether? You are in my center screen, Nate, so why don't you take that first?
Sure. Yeah, so it's kind of as a marketing professional, it's unfortunate that we're losing those sort of tracking abilities
Right.
with like the new Apple iOS updates and stuff. But then as a consumer, having your privacy protected is obviously a good thing without all these like cookies and crawlers and stuff tracking you. So it is important to obviously measure your results, but just know that it might not be the full picture with these sort of limitations. So it is helpful to grow an email list and work on other ways to get traffic to your website, whether it's blogging and stuff that is measurable, so that you do control sort of, if you can track somebody better, like on your website than through Facebook and stuff like that. So I guess it goes back to just kind of diversifying your marketing efforts so that you're not putting everything just into social media, which you have more difficulty sort of measuring.
Okay. So not abandoning Facebook entirely, but having it sort of as one factor in a broader strategy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Dan? What's your take on Facebook? Is it worth the effort to advertise there still?
This might be my controversial take, but I would say, if anything, it's more valuable to advertise there now than ever. primarily because of this issue. If you have a good customer profile and you really understand your customers, you can plug that data directly into Facebook and the psychographic and demographic areas, areas of interest, for example, and still get fantastic results. And now you have less competition for the same group of people if other people did rely on those different metrics. So to me, it really kind of comes back to really having a solid ideal customer profile. And that works in a lot of different ways. Many different advertisers, you can bring an ideal customer profile directly to them, and they can tell you which way to advertise on their channel in the most effective way. And you can still do that with Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms.
That is interesting. So it's worth the effort if you're getting the results, and you can refine those and really seek out more of your ideal customer. Right.
I would say so, yeah. And
okay.
That again continues to give you a better way to advertise them with Facebook ads. As Nate was mentioning, if you have high quality content and you're just kind of pushing one ad a week, you can kind of push that one ad to your ideal customer profile and continue to grow your audience.
Okay. What do you think, Izzy? Where do you land on the Facebook question?
I mean, I'm going to give the classic marketer answer and say it really depends. But my instinct says to come back to that question of assessing your goals. Like Nate was saying, if your goal is to drive traffic to your website and you're losing visibility on what those users are doing once they actually get there, and if they're interacting, and your ability to retargeting might be diminished now that, you know, Facebook is losing track of those people, it could be time instead to consider, well, is it helpful to my business to change my goals on Facebook advertising and focus more on in-platform engagement? So either growing your follower list or getting a larger number of likes and comments on your posts, because Facebook and Instagram still keep really good track of what people are doing on the platforms themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that might not be something that's helpful to every business.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're finding that your results on Facebook for traditional traffic ads are decreasing since those privacy changes, it's an option for how to continue using the platform, just by shifting what the results are that you're going to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. So you just change your expectations some. Okay. And I'm curious, what are you folks seeing as social media trends? What are you monitoring? What are you preparing for? And Izzy, I'm going to ask you first, because you and I had a really interesting conversation about the whole issue of privacy, which is, you just touched on that. So talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, you know, we're all very aware of the fact that privacy is a big issue with advertising and social media right now. And that's not just on the business side, it's on the consumer side as well. So one thing that I think brands need to spend more time thinking about is how they can be conscious of the ways that they're interrupting someone's personal time through advertising and social media, because our consumers want to feel like they can trust the brand that they buy from, and like they have a real relationship. So for example, one way you can do that is if you are running Facebook ads, you know, paying attention to the frequency with which those ads are being shown to users. It's a metric you can see when you're looking at your results. And oftentimes when that frequency starts to get higher than, you know, 4 or 5, you can sort of put yourself in your customer's shoes and say, do I really want to see this ad a 6th or 7th time if I am this person? And if the answer from the human perspective is no, then it might be time to sort of give that audience a break, show them some different content maybe, or change your targeting to a new audience. I think it's little things like that of just being aware of where your presence is making an interruption and how you're using people's data to, you know, accomplish your business goals. I think any good professional development person would tell you that you should always have your customers' interests at heart. And sometimes we can lose sight of that when we have so much data at our fingertips. We're just like excited to use it in all these ways. But we really want to consider, am I providing value?
Great. Great. I think that's very empathetic. What you're saying.
We try.
How about you, Nate? What kinds of trends are you seeing? What are you monitoring, or maybe even what are you sparking yourself? What are you seeing?
Well, everybody's probably aware that Instagram's really pushing the reels, the video content. Mm-hmm. So that's important. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be like a fully produced video. It can just be something that you shoot on your phone in real time, sort of behind the scenes. I've even seen people turn a picture into a video and kind of try to manipulate the algorithm that way, with some decent results. I'm also seeing like carousel posts, which are when you're uploading like multiple photos to one post where you can swipe through the pictures. Those tend to do really well. There's something in the algorithm that if, let's say there's 4 photos in a post and it's shown to somebody's timeline, if they don't engage with that post, the algorithm will serve them the same post, but with the second photo shown. And then they'll kind of show it potentially multiple times until the person kind of is forced to engage with the post. So creating content like that alongside reels and everything else, and kind of diversifying the type of content that you're putting out there, we found does fairly well.
And do you really not need to be especially proficient at putting together a video? I mean, I always think, you know, people in business want to reflect professional standards. And so the notion of putting together a quick video that you're posting on Instagram as a reel that maybe isn't polished, I don't know. How do you convince someone like me, like, you know, I'm not going to do that, but maybe it's worth it to come off, or not come off, but to be presented as you know, this is very authentic to the person who's posting it. It isn't perfect.
Yeah, I'd say definitely try it and see kind of how it works for your business. Maybe there's one post a week, or if you schedule it into the other content, that you can kind of say that and set their expectations that it's not going to be a very well polished post. And so, you know, every Friday we're going to show you how we make a certain thing or how we do a certain thing. So they can expect that it's not going to be like the most perfect photoshopped photo, and that it'll be kind of like raw, you know, sort of behind the scenes sort of stuff, and just see how that does. And if you see it does really well, then maybe those sort of unpolished posts will do well, and maybe you want to start doing more of them. It's really seeing what kind of engagement and things you get from your audience. Okay,
cool. That's reassuring. How about you, Dan? What trends are you monitoring?
So a couple of them really. One of the big ones for me, and this is mostly from a video perspective, but length of content. And length of content in relation to authenticity. So kind of like what you guys were just touching on, people are much more likely to watch a short video that isn't polished because they have the understanding that it is more authentic on a base level than they are like a 15-second television commercial or a 15-second commercial on YouTube. And you see that reflected in a lot in how big brands are advertising in their short form content nowadays. So you see brands like Liberty Mutual, for example, while it's still polished and professional content, they're using trends, or they're making fun of trends, or they're using dances, and they're doing these other things that wouldn't otherwise come off as like, you know, polished professional. And that's all in short form content. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have your long form content. No one's going to sit down and watch a 30-minute video of someone holding their cell phone and walking around and it's all shaky. We just don't do that. And I just find it very interesting that the longer the piece of content is, the more likely it is to be polished. And the shorter form content, even when you have a brand that is really polished, you tend to let the rules go a little loose there.
Cool.
Also, just to add to what Dan said, the short content seems to, if it's like a 3-second or even a 4 or 5 second video, you might end up watching it 4 or 5 times. So then the view count starts to increase, because if you're not just swiping to the next thing and it's a really quick video, it may replay over and over again. And so all those additional views make the algorithm think that it's more popular than it really is. So those really short clips can sometimes end up going viral. And that's how you see something like being watched like 150,000 times when every other video is only reaching like several thousand people. And that sort of really short content can actually help you get even more eyeballs.
Those replays are phenomenal for the algorithm.
And just to jump in on the video conversation, because it is like it's so forefront of most marketers' minds right now. I mean, it like plastered all over every platform. I would say like that authenticity and that unpolished is part of building brand trust too. In your customer's perspective, if every single piece of content you create is like clean and perfect, they're not really going to build a personal relationship with you. Whereas some of the grit and grime of being a small to medium-sized business owner and the challenges and struggles that you might face actually can provide a little bit more emotional connection. So I think that, just give it a try is really the answer, and go for it and see what happens.
Good. Well, thank you. Let's turn it over to questions from our audience. Strawberry, do you want to queue up the first for our panelists, please?
Sure thing. Are there places where people can learn more about the mechanics of apps such as Instagram? I've always used Facebook, but I'm now responsible for Instagram posts, and it's very foreign to me.
Little tutorials out there for Instagram?
I'd say you really just got to dive in and use it personally. Even if it's just on like an account that nobody's following, but you're just like practicing and playing with it. It is like a new language essentially, switching from one of these platforms to another. And I can definitely see where, people struggle, but I think you just got to try to use it and force yourself to become familiar with it and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I would love if there was a resource out there that told you what the Instagram algorithm is and how it works and how to make it work for you, it just doesn't exist. They hold that information pretty close. So I would agree with Nate that the best way to go about that is, be a user of the platform itself, so you can understand what kind of content appeals to you and the formats that you're seeing. And then really Google's right there, and there's a lot of really great blog content. If you have a specific question to ask, someone out there likely has the answer.
Good.
Yes, I actually have a little bit of a different take on this. Almost every social media platform uses the same exact content funnels. You have your 15 seconds or less video, you have your 90-second or 3-minute or less videos, and you have your image-based posts. And some platforms don't use some of those. Some platforms use all of them. But you're really dealing with the same stuff no matter where you go. It's just kind of packaged differently. And each platform will treat them individually different. But as far as like going outside of the bounds to like something that's completely new, that's probably not really going to happen.
Okay. Well, so let's take a question that came with our registrations, and that is, what percentage, if any, of an advertising budget should be earmarked for social? And what return on that budget should be expected? Now, I know that will vary depending on what kind of a business we're talking about, but could you guys just sort of weigh in with a range in terms of, if you're a small or medium-sized business, how much of your advertising budget should you consider for social? And Dan, you're up on my screen, so I'm going to toss that to you first.
If you're a business to customer business rather than a business who does services for other businesses, I would say that your social media should probably be, as a small business, 33 to 50% of your strategy.
Okay, that's very specific. Good. How about Izzy and Nate? What do you see?
I guess I'll say it depends again. I'd like the answer that Dan has given because it changes on B2B versus B2C. And not to sound like a broken record, but to go back to those goals, depending on if you're looking for sales and conversions versus maybe some of those other sub business goals like engagement or email newsletter signups, that's going to change my answer to what the percentage of return is going to be.
Okay. And what about you, Nate?
Yeah, I think again, it's important to have a variety of different marketing methods to see what works. I guess 33 to 50% is probably good. You want to make sure that you're also leaving some money on the table or time to again, try other platforms or other marketing methods. I will say that there's some great tools out there. One of them that I use on like the paid side of things, which referring to like Google pay-per-click, but is Spyfu, spyfu.com. That allows you to kind of spy on your competitors to see what they're doing. But even within like Facebook, they're more transparent now to show you what ads different pages are running. You won't get a sense of like what their actual budget is, but you could see if they're running one campaign or 15 different campaigns, and also like what platform are they running these ads on, Instagram or Facebook or Messenger, different things like that. So on every Facebook business page, within the like about section, I think there's like something that talks about page transparency, and you can actually see what ads a Facebook page is running, and you can learn a lot there to see not just the offers and the creative that they're using and stuff, but how many different sets of ads they're running, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's a great tool. I would also add, I like to do some research on wordstream.com. They have some good industry standards up there. So the same way that you would, if you were to run Google Ads, look for cost per click on different keywords, you can see what cost per click looks like on Facebook, depending on what industry you're in. That can give you a good idea of, how many results am I going to expect, depending on how much money I put in.
Cool. Strawberry, let's take the next question in the queue.
Sure thing. This one kind of dovetails off of what we were just talking about, but how much money do you recommend spending on social media ads, and what is the most cost-effective social media ad? I hear it's Instagram stories, but would appreciate more opinions.
So maybe let's just take the second portion of that. What's the most cost-effective ad and platform?
I'll jump in. I'm not sure which platform you necessarily will get the best results on until you kind of test some things. But there's I lost my train of thought, sorry, but that was one of the points I wanted to make.
I think this kind of goes back to what Izzy was saying earlier. It really kind of depends on your business. A plumber's not going to do great on Facebook or LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that audience research piece is really key. Just searching like what are the top categories on Pinterest can let you know if your business might be a good advertising spot there versus, if you're B2B, maybe you focus on LinkedIn. It really does depend on what type of business you are and whether or not your customers are active on that platform.
So just following up on that, one of the other questions that was submitted with registrations asked for your thoughts on the best B2B social media platform in Maine. Like, do you guys see a go-to platform? Is it LinkedIn? Or I'm just curious, where do you see most B2B conversations happening?
I'm happy to start here. I think LinkedIn can have a lot of success. tends to be a little bit more expensive than some of the other advertising platforms. So that's just something to keep in mind going into it. And oftentimes some of the best LinkedIn strategies are the organic ones where you really are focusing on networking and building personal relationships. That takes a lot of time. So again, another consideration. But then I think Dan mentioned this earlier with Facebook. It's almost a place to understand, what is the basic information about this business. For example, I was getting my Christmas tree a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of those Christmas tree farms in the area might not even have a website. But what they do have is a Facebook page, and I can go and look and see what are their hours. Have they posted recently to tell me whether or not their farm has a large quantity of small trees versus wreaths or what have you. And reviews are really important. Facebook has sort of become a little like Yelp, where people use it as a tool to just get a basic evaluation. And I think for B2B, that can be important. Having, customers who have reviewed your business for services you've offered can live on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll jump in. I remembered my second thought there, which was around the budget and how much these businesses should be spending. There's another tool that's just built within the Facebook Business Manager. Again, this is different than just like boosting a post, which they make it really easy to do. But within the Facebook Business Manager, you can create an audience essentially and really narrow it down to say like, women 45 and older with children that live within a 50-mile radius of Portland. And it will actually give you the amount of people that you potentially could reach. And you can almost put a budget into a little box on how much you're willing to spend. And they'll tell you an estimated number of people that you would reach every day over the course of like the next week or 30 days. And that'll give you an idea of how much you potentially would need to spend in order to reach that full amount of people in your bucket. Or, maybe you want to like spread that out. So you're running an ad on, an everyday thing for the next 6 months, sort of like an awareness ad, things like that. So there are some ways to help you kind of estimate how much it would cost to reach your potential audience that way.
Cool. That's really interesting. I didn't know if Facebook had that kind of capability. That's really interesting. Strawberry, let's take another question from the queue.
Sure. Which platform is best for recruiting and hiring?
Recruiting and hiring. That is the dominant thing that is on every business manager's mind right now. We're dealing with this really persistent workforce crunch. So recruiting and hiring, what do you guys think?
I think the obvious answer that a lot of people will say is LinkedIn, because obviously, but I think there's a lot to be said for Facebook has a jobs feature now, being able to put things on there, and being able to use those kind of, and that's also on LinkedIn as well, being able to use those like secondary aspects rather than just making a post is probably a lot more helpful. And something that we haven't really brought up yet, one of the things that actually does make Facebook sort of unique is Facebook groups. And Facebook groups are a really great way to reach a specific local audience to do something like hire someone in your local area or in an area where you need someone.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Good.
Or even a really specific group of industry professionals.
Right, trade associations. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Let's take the next question. We're getting almost out of time here. So let's see if we can finish the questions in the queue.
Okay, and I think we can actually combine these last two questions.
Okay.
Some users seem to be transitioning from Twitter to new platforms like BeReal or Mastodon. Any thoughts on departing Twitter, and is it worth it to invest in a new platform?
I mean, I could be totally wrong here, but I don't know any small businesses who advertise on Twitter in the first place.
Yeah,
so not a lot at stake.
Twitter fits into a very special niche, I would say. If you're in the sports industry or if you're a journalist, for example, I think Twitter is not going anywhere anytime soon. But for the most part, unless you are one of those larger brands who uses Twitter for customer service, like people asking questions and having responses, we don't really have very many clients who have had success either with an advertising strategy or organic. That's not to say you can't, but it's not usually my go-to.
Okay, Nate, you want to have the last word on Twitter here?
Yeah, it's a great listening tool. That's about it. Let's see what Elon Musk does with it. It's probably going to be buried in the ground soon. So,
okay, you heard it here first, everyone. Well, we are out of time. So let me say thank you very much to our audience and participants who are watching this now, our sponsors, and most especially to our panelists, Dan, Izzy, and Nate. Thank you very much for spending this afternoon with us and for sharing your insight and your expertise. This is, as Ali mentioned at the top of our conversation, this is our last business conversation for the year, but come next year, we're going to be introducing a new business topic of business series. We're calling it Rev Up, and the focus is growing young Maine businesses. And our first topic is going to be looking at when launching a company means launching an industry, and we're going to be looking at innovators in the aerospace industry here in Maine. So please stay tuned for news about that. We'll get the details out on all of our social media channels just as soon as we nail that down. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and that your lives are full of joy and gratitude, and have a very happy new year. Thanks, everyone. Take care.